G'day, happy Wednesday wherever you happen to be. Welcome to the workbench in the zhuzhed up man cave. Let's get to a big and busy show, and I've got a present for you tonight. No sooks, no lefties. I know you like that. A great panel coming up in a moment or two's time. Our dear friend Megan Kelly joins us from the United States, and a couple of surprises, including a very special new face on the show that I hope you will like as much as I do. But first, inflation. Remember when the Prime Minister had said, conveniently in the lead up to the last election, that we'd turned the corner. The worst of it was behind us. Nothing to see here anymore. Well, today, the receipt came through about what we know has been happening for many months since the federal election, and that is that there is yet another increase in inflation. This one now has it closer to 4% than 3%, and of course the margin that the Reserve Bank wants it is between 2 and 3%. So, what did Jim Chalmers talk about today? Oh, that's right, Scott Morrison.
Those measures are all about trying to unify the country, not divide the country. I think typically Scott Morrison has a very different objective. He's a pretty divisive figure.
We learned today that we're going to definitely have another 10 years of budget deficits, all of which are put on top of the $1 trillion of debt that we already have, and that spending increases have blown a $57 billion black hole in Chalmers' budget. Economists have said, like I have shown you for as long as I've had access to this camera, that the structural deficit, the baked-in spending that means, no matter how many record highs of taxation they take, the spending that is promised gets bigger and bigger every year. And for once, it's not just me, it's someone way smarter than me making the point.
The single explanation, I think, is excessive government spending. That leaves less room for private sector spending, has meant higher inflation than otherwise would have been the case, and unfortunately also means higher interest rates than what otherwise have been the case.
Yet what did other members of the Albanese government talk about today? That's right, former Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
To tar an entire religion, I just think, is unacceptable. It's not based in fact, and it undermines social cohesion.
Now, of course, the problem here is that inflation, which has been getting out of control for many months, is now very close to being a major economic problem. Now, it is, of course, calculated not month by month. We get an indication month by month, but it is done every 3 months, quarter by quarter. And the past couple of quarters, it's been starting to go back up. Now, remember, part of the frustration that people have about inflation is not the difference between this month and last month, but this year and last year, this year 2 years, this year 3 years, and almost everything costs way more than it used to. Sadly, the Reserve Bank only has one lever to pull when it comes to this. Rather than telling the government to pull its head in when it comes to spending, the Reserve Bank, well, it, of course, is in a position to raise or lower interest rates to make things harder for the everyday citizen, for the average family, because, of course, the average family are the ones who need to show more economic restraint than the federal government. Now, I have shown you, again, for years, that since the election of this government, tens of thousands of dollars has been needed to pay off the very same mortgage that you had before Jim Chalmers became the Treasurer and before Anthony Albanese became the Prime Minister. Again, another smart bloke with glasses is telling us about what some of the changes, including the removal of the so-called rebate, which of course was just covering up the increases in electricity prices, which was covering up the real effects on inflation. Well, this guy has said that today's inflation figures, combined with the end of energy rebates, rising health insurance costs, are smashing household budgets. Thanks, Scoop. All of these increases combined would mean that an average Australian household would stand to shell out an additional $2,192 over the course of this year. He points out how inflation is widespread. It is hitting power bills, it is rentals, and it is mortgages. You don't say. It was extraordinary to see some parts of the media play, oh, really? When if you have been paying attention, and I know you do, month in, month out, we've been showing you that it's not between 2 and 3, it has been between 3 and 4 for a while, and now closer at 3.8 to 4, it continues to be a problem. In fact, in just December alone, these are the things that went up. Housing, a lot higher than 3.8. the cost of education, alcohol and tobacco, recreation and culture. All of those things way higher than the 3.8. As always, insurance keeps going up at 2.5 now on top of a 20% from 2 years ago. You can understand why people get frustrated. Yet what did the federal government have to say today when part of their own decision-making, which was to take away the little election gift that helped hide the inflation dragon during an election campaign, is now starting to go back up, and the average Australian family could be now $2,000 worse off as a result of the economy that this government is leading? Well, they're trying to tell you, this is not the inflation that you think it is.
It's the top of our list. Like, cost of living is the top priority of this government, and it has to be.
Really? So it's the top priority of this government, yet one of the things that they introduced to help deal with power prices that increase in part because we have to spend, what, $1 trillion? $2, $3 trillion going from the old system to the one that makes people feel better, because the planet, of course, is just 1% controlled by Australia when it comes to the climate. 99% of the problem is the rest of the world. But of course, because we must feel better about ourselves and the politics of these things are all ramped up, and the government wants to tell us that we've turned the corner when we had not really even got to the corner, they want to keep telling you that their number one priority is cost of living. They want to pretend the too little, too late tax cuts, and they've had a few versions of it, stupidly opposed by the Liberal Party, which opened up a whole bunch of political damage for them at the last election. But it is extraordinary that in the 3 years that Anthony Albanese was the opposition leader, every single price rise on everything from bread to petrol was the Prime Minister's fault. In the 4 years that Anthony Albanese has been the Prime Minister, it's still Scott Morrison's fault? Help me out here. When it's good, it's your management. When it's bad, it's his fault. And when all else fails, just start talking about culture wars. I hope the Australian people can see through this BS, but alas, the scoreboard suggests they're fine with it. Now, the Prime Minister also is keen to tell us what the number one priority of his government is, which apparently is different than the other number one priority that you just heard about.
We continue to prioritise keeping Australians safe.
Now, the Prime Minister likes to play this little game that, he's sort of dad, granddad, cool uncle in chief. And as long as he always says, hey, everyone, can't we just get along? If you're anyone who points out how Australia is not getting along, then somehow you're part of the problem. Rather than the bloke who wants to pretend to have the responsibility to be able to hold everyone together but wants no accountability about the reality of things. Now, it's a fine speech, and he often gives it.
A country united and liberated by the Australian Covenant, a commitment that every citizen makes to our nation, and a promise our people make to each other, to leave behind the burden of old prejudices and hatreds. Unity, not division. That is the Australia of 2025.
And who disagrees? Of course we want unity. Of course we want everyone to live peacefully. We all know there was a time when we lived a lot more peacefully than we do today. And there's a term the Prime Minister has used over and over again, and he sort of mainstreamed this as the ultimate litmus test about whether Australia was getting along or not.
Social cohesion, social cohesion, social cohesion, social cohesion.
Well, there are many things that go into that concept of social cohesion. Now, that term has been used heavily over the past couple of years, as there have been horrible examples of anti-Semitism. But there are other examples about how we are failing when it comes to our social cohesion, when we are failing on the mission of unity. Some of these matters are currently before the courts, so all I can do is simply list the past few weeks in Australia and tell me whether you think that Australia is more socially cohesive in 26 than it was in 25, let alone in 20, let alone in 15, let alone in the year 2010. There is a person who is currently before the courts alleged to have used hate speech at a March for Australia Day rally. There is a man who is alleged to have made explosives and thrown a pipe bomb into the Perth Invasion Day rallies 2 days ago. At the height of summer, a Belconnen man allegedly was believed to have put 15 pipe bombs in and around Canberra, but for some reason not considered a potential act of terrorism. Again, all alleged, all before the courts, all will have their day in court. And then, of course, there's this bloke who decided to do what the Labor Party voted for just 2 weeks ago as something that shouldn't be a crime.
What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it?
Okay. Now, by the way, a couple of smart cookies have pointed out, in particular when it comes to the Melbourne Invasion Day thing, is that Victoria is, of course, leading the nation when it comes to reconciliation. It is leading the nation when it comes to trying to deal with the quote-unquote sins of the past. And remember, there was a signing of a treaty between First Nations people in Victoria and the government of Victoria. So could somebody please explain to me why, when the Victorian government has signed a treaty, you are still taking to the streets as if no one had recognised the sins of the past? Or is the point that it doesn't matter what is done by governments of all stripes? You just want to protest anyway. Now, if I said that homosexuality was an evil act which brought evil outcomes in the form of STDs, that would be pretty wild. Or if women were to be hung by the breasts, I would be off the air, I wouldn't finish the hour, and that would be absolutely correct. Those statements are attributed to a bloke in a series of news articles more than 10 years ago, after he was invited by the then Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, to dine at Kirribilli House. Malcolm Turnbull was then asked later on Macquarie Radio in 2016 if he regretted inviting the said sheikh. The then Prime Minister said, "I do." Well, he's back in the news today because the sheikh is now one of the leaders of the National Imams Council. He had a crack at former Prime Minister Scott Morrison today after he made the following suggestions in Israel overnight.
Islamic leaders have a pastoral duty to protect their communities from radicalisation. And I believe most take this responsibility very seriously. However, stronger institutional frameworks would assist them, but it would also expose those who do not share their commitment. And it is time that the Islamic institutions in Australia adopted nationally consistent, self-regulated standards.
The sheikh released a statement today on behalf of the Australian National Imams Association saying, quote, "We call on former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, Senator Bragg," that being Andrew Bragg, "and all political parties and leaders to act with responsibility, restraint and integrity in their public commentary." Goes on to say, "and to refrain from using divisive and misleading terms such as radical Islam or extremist Islam or other divisive language." Now, let's be very clear about terms like radical Islam and why they are used by, among others, the current, the former and many other Prime Ministers. This is to show how far from the mainstream of Islam people and organisations like ISIS are, who have killed in the name of creating a caliphate, a religious state, where you can be killed for not being a believer. In the same way that we say things like fundamentalist preachers on the fringe of Christian communities, the term is about trying to draw a line between the people of good faith and those who seek to justify violence through a twisted version of their faith. The sheikh claims It was during Mr Morrison's Prime Ministership that an Australian national murdered 51 innocent people in Christchurch after being radicalised on Australian soil. On that occasion, no collective blame was placed on a race, religion or community, nor should it have been. That standard must apply consistently. Well, we had a look back at the tape. What were the terms that we used to describe the man who committed those heinous acts?
Confessed white supremacist Brenton Tarrant arriving for his first day of reckoning.
But in a previous court appearance, he made what was interpreted as a white supremacist hand gesture.
Under his name online is a racist manifesto claiming that white Christians are under threat from other religions and races.
Now, let's get to the Sky News Pulse, the brand new political poll which has set the political world afire. Every second Tuesday, you will see it revealed first here on Paul Murray Live. Details quickly to follow at skynews.com.au. Now, what I love about the poll is it's an awful lot of people and it's done by a very serious polling company that got it right about how far in front the Libs were and about how eventually, in real time, how far Labor ended up in front before the last election. That's the YouGov organisation. It has made a lot of news, and rightly so. Why? Because of the rise of Pauline Hanson. As you've heard everyone tell you, as we told you at the same time last night, again, join me every second Tuesday, you will see it first here. All eyes in the political world will be on those broadcasts because we want to see what's happening with One Nation. As you know, One Nation, now a quarter of the vote. Extraordinary when you think about it. In terms of the lower house, there is Barnaby Joyce, who is the only member of One Nation in the lower house, but he's not running to be the next Prime Minister. He's not trying to do a Craig Kelly here. Instead, there is currently an empty orange chair that 25% of Australians want to vote for. But I thought I should break some of these numbers down for you and give you a little more information about how people your age are voting or thinking about voting right now. 18 to 24s, who most likely will be watching this online, just 8% are pro One Nation. Their bigger choice is the Greens, but still Labor on top with 36. Once you start to move towards the back end of university and start getting on with your real life, One Nation doubles from 8 to 16. The Greens fall from 32 to 25, and Labor basically stays where it is. Here's where we start to get some movement. Once you hit 35 to 49, you're in the prime of your working life, most likely to have a young family. One Nation second on the ladder at 19%, Labor at 33%, the Coalition falling back to that dismal, or should I say the Liberal Party, 16%, and with the National Party back at 2%. But when it really starts to take over is that One Nation is now the leading preference of people over the age of 50. Now, there are basically as many people over the age of 50 in Australia as there are under the age of 50. And for people who believe that, well, all of this is just some super oldies thing, it's half the country. 35% of people with their primary vote say that they would vote One Nation. 33% say the Labor Party. And have a look at how close in single digits everyone else, including the Liberal Party, is. At 65%, traditionally, a place where the Liberal Party would have assumed that they would win in a canter, 34% of people over the age of 65, the people who've seen a life, lived a life, may well be having to care for the grandkids because both their kid and the person that they are shacked up with are working. 34%. Now, of course, for this to all translate into the lower house would be very significant, and as we showed you, that if the right candidate and everyone voted, then yes, they would end up winning more seats than all but the Labor Party. That would, of course, officially make them the opposition. And you'll hear a lot of people trying to talk about One Nation and its future in the lower house. Reality is it's a couple of years away. Reality, we wouldn't know who would be its leader and in which part of the country they would come from. Now, of course, people like Campbell Newman previously in the Queensland Parliament have been able to win from outside. Bob Hawke, way back in the 80s, was able to do the same. But the game, of course, is all about the Senate. Now, the likelihood of One Nation running as high as they currently are would mean it wouldn't be one or two every now and then. It'd be almost at least one senator, maybe two in places like Queensland, in every single state. And this leads to a big problem for the National Party, because when the National Party is in coalition with the Liberal Party, they, of course, are able to get the leftover votes from the Liberal Party, which flow down to the number 2 position, which is always the Nationals spot, And that's how so many Nationals end up getting elected to the federal parliament. Why? Because you need, what, about 14% of the vote to end up getting into the federal parliament. So if you're out on your own and you've got to get 14%, that's a little bit harder, which is why the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, the Brisbane Times today said there'd be a massive chance of some friends of ours just falling out of the parliament if the Nats were out on their own. But that is the decision, of course, that has been made. In Victoria and New South Wales, the Liberals and Nationals have historically run on a joint Senate ticket, even though their two parties are not merged as they are in Queensland. And at the next election, former Shadow Cabinet Ministers Bridget McKenzie and Ross Goodell face re-election. If the two parties do not reconcile before the next election, both would struggle to claim a quota, which is just over 1/7 of the statewide vote, hence the 14%. The Nationals got just 7.3% in the lower house vote in New South Wales, 4.6% in Victoria, and obviously this is well short of a quota. Now, again, regardless of who you think is right and wrong and up and down and all the rest of it, the truth is that for the National Party to be able to thrive in a place like the upper house, they have to be in the same tent hoping for the flow-on vote of the Liberal Party, which traditionally would have more voters, not many more seats at the moment, but more voters in more built-up areas, which could be why the bloke who has already left the house twice is starting to think about coming home.
A lot to work through and where we get to, but we're calm about that. We're in no rush. If the three are reinstated, the coalition goes back to all the terms and conditions that we had, that we signed up to in May. That was what the party room voted for, and that's what we've got. So we're calm about that.
For her part, Susan Lee is holding off on what could be the killer blow when it comes to the Nationals. Now, it would also be a killer blow to the Liberal Party. So who knows? Do you destroy the village to save it? Who knows what the logic is here? But she has written to David Littleproud and sent a version of some of that text to Liberal MPs tonight. I reminded him that as leaders of the Liberal and National parties, we are stewards of two great movements that exist to serve the Australian people, and that maintaining a strong and functioning relationship between our two parties is in the national interest, whether it is informal coalition or not. David's team have just advised me that their focus is the spill motion that he now faces and therefore unavailable to meet until that spill is considered. What rubbish. Now, if people have come to their senses and they've worked out whether they like it or not, but the only way to prop each other up is to prop each other up, the only other way to get the flow-on votes is to prop each other up, well then this is why cooler heads should have prevailed, that, OK, there may well have been a scenario where some shadow ministers had to be suspended, sacked, some creative way of making it seem like they were being punished without sacking them. But conversely, the response of everyone pulls out, we're out of the coalition, and then a week later, well, maybe not. The problem here is that if people are paying attention, they cannot believe what they are saying. But more likely, they're not paying attention. And that's even worse, because it means they're hearing about it from other people, and the whisper effect of all of this is not going to be good for them. Now, I saw my mate Matt Canavan a bit earlier on with Andrew Bolton, quite correctly says, look, a lot of water to go under the bridge. I'm a person who has long talked about one nation, that has shown their ups and downs and their state run and their federal runs for many, many, many elections. The most likely success is going to be in the Senate. That vote in the lower house will matter because preferences. But if the Libs finish behind One Nation, do they give their preferences to One Nation, or are they going to give their preferences to Labor, who of course will give their preferences to the Libs because they won't give the preferences to One Nation? Confusing? Yeah, a little bit. But all of this, of course, has perhaps produced an adult in the room. Colin Boyce is a bloke who I will not say I have a huge amount of knowledge about, but he's a bloke who was on TV with Kieran Gilbert this morning, and this is why you should always be watching morning, noon and night. And he decided to drop a bomb live on air that even surprised KG, which was that this guy who, probably has a snowball's chance in hell, believes the only way back is not for mum and dad to stop fighting, but maybe mum or dad to move out.
I will be moving a spill motion on Monday afternoon in the National Party room to give my colleagues an option, because the reality is if they follow the course they're on now, we are going over the political cliff.
And in terms of spilling the leadership, you don't believe David Littleproud, his performance has been up to scratch? Is that the motivation, and who should replace him?
Oh, 100%. So I will be standing for the leadership.
Now, again, he may have a snowball's chance in hell. He may have his only vote in the parliament could be him. I don't know how popular or otherwise he is. Certainly, I would suggest Matt Canavan, if I could pick all of the Nats who could end up being the leader, even Bridget McKenzie as the leader. But pretty obviously, you can't threaten to leave multiple times. You can't leave twice and expect everyone to forget, because they won't. And for the obvious electoral survival, they have to be together. So something has to break. You can't just keep going back to the same people making the same threats over and over again, whether you agree with them or not. That's just the reality of political maths, which is always part of the game. Now, we like to poke fun at politicians, particularly when they decide to make stars of themselves on social media. While you have been working hard, paying your taxes, but just sitting back each and every night going, all right, Paul, what have they done today? Well, this is what they did today. Because not only do you pay their wages, not only do we have to follow their rules, but we also pay for their staffers to film to make crap social media videos like this one from Jed Carney.
ASMR Labor Policy Edition.
And just like that...
Tanya Plibersek is part of the game too. And then Chris Bowen, of course, when he's not changing our system from the one that worked to the one that will into the future, well, he too is making a spectacle of himself online.
Okay, let's go.
As of today, Australians have installed 200,000 home batteries since 1 July last year.
I've got jeans and a polo on. Would you buy a future from this man? Probably not. But the actual winner, and by that I mean not quite, is a social media post from about 18 months ago. David Southwick today became the returned deputy leader of the Liberal Party in Victoria. And he hopefully will not do what he did when Taylor Swift came to Melbourne in 2024. Ever, ever, ever again. David, delete this video.
David, what are you doing? Oh, well, you know, it's Swifties tonight. I've got the T-shirt. I couldn't get tickets, so I thought I'd have my own concert here in the office. But your next appointment's here. Oh, seriously? Oh, gee. Hang on, I'll be one tick.
A few moments later.
David, the hat. Oh, crikey.
Oh, wow. Wow. Part of the team hoping to take down Labor, which of course deserves to lose in Victoria. Delete the video, David. And hopefully the person who gave you the idea to do the video.